this class. Test on Friday. Chapter 8. Start with a little chart. Mitochondria, chloroplasts, or both. So if I give you a statement, you tell me whether it's mitochondria, chloroplast, or both. Produce 36 ATP. That would be mitochondria, chloroplast, or both. Where are most ATP produced? Are ATP produced in mitochondria?
Yeah.
Yes, they are. Are ATP produced in chloroplast? No. What about the light reactions? Don't we get some ATP there? Okay, so they're produced both in mitochondria and chloroplasts. Which one produces the most? Which one the cell used to make ATP? The mitochondria. So this would be the mitochondria. Complete cellular respiration should produce 36 ATP, as long as oxygen is present. Oxygen is a waste product. Which one of these produces oxygen as waste? The chloroplasts. Mitochondria use oxygen. Chloroplasts in the light reactions produce oxygen, but they produce it as a byproduct. So it's one of the products of the photosynthesis reaction. Needs O2 and glucose. That is mitochondria. They need oxygen and glucose to work. Chloroplasts produce oxygen and glucose, but they don't need. They need carbon dioxide and water. Pigment. That would be chloroplasts. Chlorophyll, the most common one. Carotenoids or others we discussed. And the last one we'll go over is found in plants and animals. Which one is found in both plants and animals? Mitochondria. Mitochondria are found in plants and animals. Animals don't have chloroplasts, so it can't be both. I told the last class that wrong. I hope not. Okay. So what happens if you put an aerobic organism in an anaerobic environment? What needs the oxygen to work?
Aerobic.
What part of the aerobic? We're talking respiration. Respiration, what are the three parts of respiration? It happens in the mitochondria. What are the three parts of cellular respiration? What's the first step in cellular respiration? So respiration is going to be affected. What's the first step in respiration? It's the second step of respiration. Or the third. Any one of the parts of respiration. What's the first thing that happens to glucose when it gets in the cell? It splits. What do we call that process? Glycolysis or yeah, glycolysis. Does glycolysis need oxygen?
No.
No. It says anaerobic process. You can only get a couple ATPs from it, but any organism can do it as long as you have cytoplasm. You don't need oxygen for it. What's the next step of respiration?
The Krebs cycle.
The Krebs cycle. Does the Krebs cycle need oxygen? Actually, the Krebs cycle itself doesn't need oxygen. What's the third step? Where do we go from the Krebs cycle?
Electron transport.
Electron transport system. That needs oxygen. Oxygen accepts the electrons, it gets changed to water, or gets converted to water, used to build the water. Now, even though the Krebs cycle doesn't need oxygen directly, it needs the electron transport system to work. So if there's no oxygen, electron transport stops, and the Krebs cycle stops. Glycolysis can continue for a while. You can either go to fermentation, or even if you didn't have fermentation, you could go until you used up all the MABs and you had a buildup of pyruvate. So if you put an aerobic organism in an anaerobic environment, glycolysis will continue for a while. Krebs will shut down after the electron transport shuts down. And if you can use fermentation, you can continue with glycolysis. Okay. Organisms that can do alcoholic fermentation. Examples. What kinds of organisms do alcoholic fermentation? One organism that does alcoholic fermentation. Yeast. You put yeast in bread, put yeast in when you're preparing alcoholic beverages to collect the alcohol or collect the CO2. Yeast is kind of the exception though. What is missing in some organisms that prevents them from doing cellular respiration completely? The Krebs cycle and electron transport. What do you need to do the Krebs cycle and electron transport? Where does that happen? Where in a cell does the Krebs cycle occur? The mitochondria. So there are organisms that don't have membrane-bound organelles, so they don't have mitochondria. What kind of organisms don't have mitochondria? Organisms that don't have membrane-bound organelles. Prokaryotic organisms. And what is the only example of a prokaryotic organism we've talked about? When we say prokaryotic, what do we mean? One example of prokaryotic organism. Or one class of prokaryotic organisms. The only one that ever moved in here. Bacteria. So bacteria don't have mitochondria. They can't they do alcoholic fermentation. Most yeast, even though they are eukaryotic, they do have mitochondria. They can be made to do alcoholic fermentation. We take advantage of that in baking bread and making alcoholic beverages or alcohol in general. Where does glycolysis occur?
In the cytoplasm.
Cytoplasm. Mitochondria are the place for respiration, most of respiration. Chloroplasts for photosynthesis. But glycolysis, that first step in respiration, only requires cytoplasm. That one. What is the cause of muscle soreness when exercising? What makes your muscles ache?
Lactic acid.
Lactic acid. Remember the song? I'm gonna make your muscles ache. Lactic acid causes the burn. I said it causes achy muscles when you are exercising. Muscle fatigue. What does anabolic mean? Anabolic metabolism, what does it do?
The body builds and repairs muscle tissues.
Anabolic metabolism builds things, takes small molecules and make them into bigger molecules. Which one of our processes is an anabolic process? Which one is building something? What are the processes we've talked about? The Calvin cycle is part of photosynthesis, and the Calvin cycle does build things. But photosynthesis in general is an anabolic process. Respiration, we get things out of respiration. We get carbon dioxide, we get water, we get ATPs, but we're breaking down glucose to get that. In photosynthesis, we're using those things to build glucose. So building is anabolic, breaking down is catabolic. All right, let's see what we can do here. Where do you find most chloroplasts in a plant? All right, let's do it a little different. Give me a plant.
A flower.
A flower. Let's go with, I don't know what kind of flower it is. Dirt. Okay. There's our flower. On that flower, where are you going to find most of the chloroplasts? The leaves. How do you know they're in the leaves? They're green. So then we've got the stem, the roots, the flower itself, which will eventually give you the seeds. All right, so what do plants take in from the environment? Sunlight. from the roots. Again, come in from the leaves, but a lot of it comes from the roots.
Carbon dioxide.
And carbon dioxide. And what does the plant give back to the environment? Oxygen, all the time, and glucose, if it happens to get eaten. It's there, it's available. Okay. Okay, here's respiration. You take glucose and oxygen, break it down into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Where is that energy stored? Where do you put the energy you get from cellular respiration? Over here we had sunlight energy. We use carbon dioxide and water is stored in glucose. Where do we store it over here? In the third phosphate group of ATP. So we store that energy in ATP. And specifically, we store it here on the last phosphate. There's some in the second phosphate, but we've been talking about going from ADP to ATP. So we're going to store that energy in the third phosphate out from the ATP. All right, we did not do a lab over this, but give me some factors that would influence how much photosynthesis goes on. What are things that would have an effect on photosynthesis? External things from the plant, not the plant. Sunlight. Time the lights on, the intensity of the light. You might even throw color of the light. Color might make a difference. We know the color of leaves is important. At least it's consistent. What else? The amount of water. Water is one of the reactants. If you're short on a reactant or you have more reactant, you should be able to do less or more. What's the other reactant? Carbon dioxide. So the amount of CO2 could have an effect on the rate of photosynthesis. All of those things. All right, we said, photosynthesis was anabolic. What kind of a process is digestion? Eating food all the way down to cellular respiration. Catabolic. Hope that's what you said. Metabolic is everything. Anabolic and catabolic. Put some more inside. Catabolic is the one that breaks things down. So the balance between anabolic and catabolic determines whether you're growing, shrinking, or staying the same. What is the science of energy called? Branch of physics deals with energy. Thermodynamics. Remember the two laws of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy and the law of increasing entropy. What do we call organisms that can use sunlight to make chemical energy for their use and the use of others? Are organisms that can do photosynthesis called? Autotrophs. Also called plants and producers, but autotrophs are those that can make their own food. What kind of organisms do respiration? Take glucose and go all the way to ATPs. Heterotrophs do respiration. They take glucose, break it into in glycolysis, do Krebs cycle, do electron transport, and get 36 ATPs. Are they the only ones? What kind of organisms have mitochondria where respiration would occur? heterotrophs do respiration?
Yes.
Yes, both heterotrophs and autotrophs use the glucose in exactly the same way. Autotrophs get all their ATP from burning glucose in the mitochondria. Heterotrophs use all their glucose to get ATP by burning it in their mitochondria. The difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs is that autotrophs can make their own glucose. They can make their own fuel. And let's see. What are the two things produced in the thylakoids? A good place to start is, what are the parts of photosynthesis that happen in thylakoid membranes? What part of photosynthesis occurs in the thylakoid membranes? The light reactions occur in the thylakoids. And what do we get from the light reactions? What are the products of the light reaction? Okay, that is true, and I know you're Googling it now, but ATP is what I want you to remember. NADPH is an energy molecule, but we said we took everything to the electron transport system and got ATPs from it. Not entirely true, but conceptually that will work. What else do we get besides ATP? Oxygen. That's where we get our oxygen. We're all breathing. At least I think we're all breathing. Unless we're pretty quiet. That ATP from the thylakoids never leaves the chloroplast. It's not ATP used to run the cell. It's ATP used to build glucose. One more page. Which group of plants, or which class of plants, or which photosynthesis type of plants only collect CO2 at night in order to conserve water? What were the two alternative forms of photosynthesis we discussed? What were the two alternative photosynthesis pathways, both of which conserve water? question. Last page of chapter 8, section 2.
Hampton.
CAM plants. CAM plants only collect CO2 at night. What was the other alternative there? What other kind of plants were there besides CAM?
C4.
The C4 plants. And the C4 plants had intermediates that were 4 carbons long instead of 3 carbons long, like the ones we had in regular photosynthesis. But both were to conserve water. All right, if you know that stuff inside out and understand it, not just be able to spit it back out, you should do very well on Friday's test, or whenever you take the test. It will be online as always.